Welcome to Ascend. I'm Alaya, sex, life, and parenting coach, and I'm so excited to be hosting this podcast. In my life, I'm always seeking higher, better, deeper, and I want to help you do the same. One orgasm? Let's have multiples. Fine childhoods? Let's give children wonderful ones. Learning to live with trauma? Let's heal and thrive post-trauma. Friends and spouses? I want soul connections and wild lovers. This podcast is an invitation. This podcast is a revolution. This podcast is ascension. Hi, welcome to episode 6 of Ascend with Alaya. Tonight's episode is going to be featuring just me, but also all of you, because I recently gave a masterclass for parents and adults on how to give children a healthy and positive sex education all the way from infancy through teenage years. And at the end of the class, I invited all the participants to email me with any questions that they had that they wanted me to be able to respond to. And I'm recording this podcast answering these questions so that for those of you that couldn't take the class or didn't have the budget for it, then you can still get some information. This is just my contribution to everybody because I'm so passionate about people learning this information and having access to how to support children when it comes to the whole realm of this subject. So I'm just going to go through the questions that you all submitted and share my thoughts on them. And as always, me answering these questions is just one facet of an answer, one possible answer, my thoughts. I always encourage all of you to expand your knowledge and expand your education. And if my answer doesn't resonate with you, go ahead and find an answer that really does. So this first question that came in actually came in from two parents. One wrote it from the perspective of being part of a really ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community where sex is just not discussed at all, really up until maybe the 2 weeks before a child is about to get married. And the other parent that submitted this was just asking it as a general question. But the question is like this: while I specifically want my child to learn about these things at home and from me, I also want to give that opportunity to other parents and not have other children hear about these topics from my children for the first time. Is there a way to teach my children all of this information while not having them broadcast it to other people, right? I want to give my kids this information and I want to tell them not to discuss it with others, but I also don't want to make this subject taboo for them. So how do we go about this? This is a great question, and I think a lot of parents have this question. And the best answer that I give for this is, number one, honoring that you all understand that yes, we want to keep how this might impact other children in mind, but ultimately our first priority and responsibility is always going to be to our children, right? I need to do right by my children. You need to do right by your children. And that needs to be your number one focus. So even if your child does ultimately share this information with another child before their parents discussed it with them or before their parents would have wanted them to hear it, right? It was still right for your child. And so that's always going to be your driving intention. And at the very least, if your child ends up sharing this information with another child, at least they're giving accurate information to these other children. At least they're giving healthy information, right? But as for that, the way that I would explain it to children is like this. All parents choose what to teach their kids, how to teach their kids, and when to teach their kids certain things. And this is the type of information that parents make different decisions on. Some families will teach it one way, other families will teach it another way. I'm choosing to tell this to you now that you're 8 years old, but some of your friends' mommies or daddies or parents might wait until they're 9 years old. And it's our job to respect that. It's our job to let parents choose what to teach their kids and when. So I'm giving you this information now, and this is something that you can always discuss with me, can always discuss with people in our family, but I want you to wait. I want you to wait before you tell this to your friends. When your friends are talking about all of this, I want you to know that what I taught you is for our family, and they get to learn things from their family. So I hope that this answer makes sense to you. And I also want you to change my wording up, and just the message should remain, right? But do it in a way that works for your child. But that's how I would teach it to kids, is that this is something that we let other parents tell their kids about. Okay. And by the way, that's how you make it not taboo, right? You're not saying there's anything wrong with the actual information. You're making it about some parents are going to wait until their kids are 9, or some parents are going to tell their kids this portion now, but then wait to tell them that portion later. And our job is to respect that, right? There's no taboo involved in any of that. Okay. Next question. This is a really fascinating question, and it's a very specific question like this, but I think that the reason why I'm answering it is because I think that we can all apply elements of this, especially from an inclusivity standpoint when educating any children, even to whom this doesn't necessarily apply. So I have 2 daughters, 10 and 8 years old. The 10-year-old is infertile due to a genetic syndrome that affects fertility, but she obviously doesn't know yet. She has a lot of questions as I'm pregnant now, and she wants to know how babies are made, etc. Do we explain the regular process to kids who are infertile and then later tell them that their bodies don't work that way? She's way too young for me to tell her, but she won't start puberty or get a period naturally. She'll start estrogen in a few years. Anyways, just some details about her experience. But because I have 2 daughters close in age, I'm not sure how to do this, and I don't want to take away her child's innocence by telling her that having children / periods will be different for her. So here's the thing. Your daughters are already 10 and 8 years old. At around 8 years old is actually when I recommend to start teaching kids about puberty, about menstruation, because some kids start puberty already at 9 years old, etc. So, and at that age, for sure, I would already have taught kids how babies are made, etc. So they are actually at the perfect age for you to have these conversations with them. Now, I wouldn't present it to your daughters as there's a regular way to make babies and have babies, and then there's, the different, less regular way, right? And I think that this goes for all parents, is that especially with so many people struggle with infertility. I mean, so many. So we're actually doing all kids a disservice when we teach them about, babies are made, and we make it super black and white, that there's this like one normal way and every other way is abnormal, etc. Right? So we're really boxing kids in. We're setting many kids up for this expectation that their bodies must work this way, and conception must work this way, and pregnancy must work this way. And then we end up with so many adults who then struggle with infertility and feel like their body is broken or they are failures. We can actually prevent so much of that trauma by how we talk about conception and pregnancy when they're younger. So the way that I would phrase it is that, one way to make a baby that happens for a lot of people is, through, right? And we just talk about traditional, penis and vagina, sex, conception, etc., right? That's one way. However, there are so many other ways to make babies. And sometimes, right, some of those ways is through, and you can just talk about just basic fertility treatments, right? Sometimes a doctor puts the sperm inside of the uterus. Sometimes the sperm and the egg are put together outside of the uterus and then implanted into, a woman's uterus. Other times, right, people choose to say, I don't want to have a baby through sex, but I still want to have a baby. And so they adopt other babies, right? Sometimes you have somebody who, they can't carry a baby in their uterus, but they could put their egg into somebody else's uterus, right? These are the types of conversations that I would start having with your kids. Now, remember, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, whoa, that sounds really overwhelming for a kid, that's way too much information, I want you to stop and consider the fact that you're looking at it through an adult lens. Right? Us as adults, with all the information that we know, and we understand the pain of infertility, or we understand, right, the difficulty that goes into infertility, or even LGBTQ plus members, who also cannot conceive through, the most basic or common forms in that sense, right? We're looking at it through that lens. But if we present it to kids as there are multiple ways to create and have children, for them, it will not come with this heavy energy or the trauma energy or the pain energy or feeling super othered, right? Especially with how how high the rates of infertility are. We're actually doing just like collectively, we're doing a service to people if we start just talking about a variety of ways to create and make babies, etc. So that's really how I would explain it to her. I would say that some bodies work this way, other bodies work another way to create babies. And then I would actually tell your daughters, I would say, sometimes people only find out how their bodies are going to create babies once they get older and they start trying to have a baby and they start trying to get pregnant, right? Say, but for you, we already know, right? That for you, it's going to be, these options are going to work for you, right? And you list some of the other options for her. These are some of the ways that you're going to be able to have a baby. And these are some of the ways that hopefully you're going to be able to have a baby, right? I would divide that from daughter to daughter. I would really not hide this from her. I would not tell her the regular process, and I'm putting regular in air quotes, because we want to move away from that, especially in your situation. I wouldn't tell her that there's this and then later spring it on her. Oh, but that's not going to work for you. I think that would actually be setting her up for a tremendous amount of disappointment. Whereas you can start her off right from an empowered place. It's kind of, and I would use an analogy, right? That, in a lot of cases, it's easiest, right? It's not in a lot of cases, it is easiest if we are born being able to see with exactly the eyes that we were created with working on their own, right? But then there are some people whose eyes don't work as well and they need glasses. And some people whose eyes really don't work and they need thicker glasses, right? And some people whose eyes don't work at all, right? So there are different ways to see. And in some cases, there are different ways to navigate the world and experience it. I would give kind of that analogy because it feels a lot more neutral in a way, right? So to be like, to one sister, right? For you, it can work like somebody who's born in their eyes just, work right away in full. For you, it's like your uterus is going to need glasses. I would kind of say it like that to her. Yeah, I think anything more specific than that, I would encourage you to work with somebody, to a professional one-on-one to guide you. This is on a general sense, what I'm offering for this. Okay, next question. How do sex toys and vibrators play into the conversation with teenagers? I'm so glad that somebody asked this question because I wouldn't have gotten to it in the class for timing's sake, but it's such a great question. So I can tell you what I would do, right? I would just discuss it with them. Once they're teenagers, especially, I would just introduce them to the concept that sex toys exist and vibrators exist, and then I would kind of keep it pretty neutral of like, is that something that you would want to try? Is it something you'd be curious about? I'm happy to help you buy one, right? And that's something that you can do on your own. You don't have to give me any more information about that. And the reason why I would introduce this topic to teenagers is because I think sex toys and vibrators and the like are just wonderful, and I'm a big fan of them in general, but also because what ends up happening is that when we don't talk about it at all, we create a taboo and a shame and a hush and an avoidance around it. And then you have people that are, in partnerships as adults or in marriages as adults where they really need sex toys in order to experience orgasm or pleasure, or they really want sex toys, to add to their fun, but what's something that should be easy and simple for them to, desire and be okay with having, they then have to work through a lot of, shame around it or stigma, or they have to start convincing their partners into it. And I hear from couples all the time where it's like it's a sore spot in their sex life, where they feel like their partner isn't valuing their pleasure because their partner doesn't want sex toys, but they really want it. So we can set our kids up for success around this by just introducing it to them as teenagers. And you're releasing a very empowered teenager, into the world who, if they were in a position, right, where they were dating somebody and they mentioned their relationship with sex toy and that person was like, oh, I don't believe in sex toys, or, I don't, right then they'd be like, then we shouldn't be in a relationship together. Like, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who puts conditions onto my pleasure, right, or feels insecure around the vibrator, etc. That's how I would introduce that. Okay, next question. So I have an 11-year-old who sometimes eavesdrops when we are having mom and dad time. Okay, I'm assuming that means sex. Or she will send her little sister over to knock and interrupt. We make it a point to stick to times that they are not around or well after bedtime, but sometimes you have to seize the moment. Amen to that. I very much am a big fan of seizing the moment. Any thoughts on how to respond or react when that happens? So this is just my guess is that this is curiosity based, and that curiosity is healthy and wonderful and beautiful. And I wonder, right? And I just, I'm just guessing over here, right? But I wonder if really this is your 11-year-old's way of telling you, I really want more information around this. I'm very curious about this. And I don't have another way of getting this information other than eavesdropping or snooping or trying to watch, etc. So I wonder if you're not having enough conversations with your 11-year-old around the topic of sex. Typically, when kids are curious about a subject, they're going to seek out that information however they feel like it's possible, right? Like statistically, a huge percentage of kids start watching porn because they're curious about sex, and porn will give them the answers, right? So it's kind of the same thing. So I would encourage you to actually start having conversations with your child. And I would be pretty straight up about it. I would say, I noticed that you like to come to mommy and daddy's door when we're having alone time, and sometimes you send your sister, and I'm wondering if that's because you're curious about what's going on. I'm wondering if that's because you have questions or you're curious about it, right? And that might actually be very relieving to your child. They might be a little bit embarrassed at first if they feel like you're calling them out, but once they see that you actually want to support their curiosity, they might be relieved. And from there, I would then segue into, I want to answer all of your questions and I want to give you the information that you're looking for. And there are also boundaries around this, right? So it's like you give your child the information about sex, and you might even tell them what you're doing behind closed doors. Without that much information, they don't need to know very specific details, right? And then say, but it crosses mommy and daddy's boundary when you come and do that, because that's our private time, right? And it's not appropriate for you to come to our door. We feel uncomfortable, right? The same way when you go into the bathroom to pee, let's say, right? You're doing something great and it's good for your body, but you don't want us, right? We don't want people to come and eavesdrop by the door, because that's our private space and our boundaries. So that's the same thing, right? So from now on, whenever you have questions about that, you come to me with those questions. I'll help you answer them, but you cannot come to our door or send your sister. It's not appropriate. And even more on a deeper level, right? Your child might also be curious about literally what it looks like. That's a situation where I would buy them books on the subject that have illustrations and be like, this is an appropriate way for you to get, visuals of this subject without crossing somebody's boundaries. So there's that. Next question. How can I respond or improve my communication with a super shy / awkward preteen who typically responds with, I know, in an effort to just cut the conversation? Seriously, nobody knows more information about the world than a teenager. I mean, really, nobody knows more than teens. I hate to make her uncomfortable, and our communication has slowly improved, but she's going into middle school. I mean, I know that there are many important discussions we need to be having. So when a child is shy or is awkward or uncomfortable, right, in that situation, I would actually just say, I can see that you're uncomfortable with this, and I understand that. This is a little bit of an uncomfortable topic. I'm even a little bit uncomfortable, and it's a very important topic. So it's more important that we be uncomfortable and have this conversation than that we avoid this conversation in order to not be uncomfortable, right? I would put that out there very explicitly. And that always helps people relax into the moment when we just acknowledge the feelings of the experience. And that's the point, is that even though it's uncomfortable, this is more important than our discomfort. It's important and necessary and safe for us to be having these conversations. And then when she responds or he responds with, I know, right? That's where you can say, I hear that you know a lot of information about this, and my job as your parent is to make sure that I have taught you what I need to teach you. So even if I'm going to tell you some things and you already know them, I still have to make sure to tell it to you in order to do my job as best as I can as your parent, right? You just put that out there, you know? Okay. Next question. This is a very intense question, and it's a very nuanced question, and I'm going to do my best to answer it while knowing that I probably won't get this perfect. What are your thoughts on family dynamics where the father is the tricky family member who still has visitations with his children? So first of all, the concept of tricky family member is something that I spoke about a lot in the course itself, or tricky person. It's in the course itself, and it was a very important part of the course. So I hope you all take it. When do you feel is an appropriate age to explain why they can't have sleepovers with daddy or alone time right now? The offenses of the father were child pornography and voyeurism, no direct abuse towards his children. I am 100% not okay with the visitations, but these are court ordered, and I want to make sure my little ones can still feel they love their father, and yet at the same time that their identity is not connected to their father's poor choices. Right now, they know daddy will never live with us, and they get to spend time with grandma and daddy together. So my first response to that is that if you don't already, you need to have a therapist working with your family, a therapist, child advocate. You need to have a therapist for this, and your kids need to have a therapist for this. A very common mistake that I see people make without knowing any better is this, this thought of like, the kids are just kids, they'll be okay, they're too young. And we don't often realize that kids need to have support for things like this, professional support. So, that's first of all. And then along with getting you and your kids professional support for this is also that you can then have the professionals help guide you based on your kids specifically, because the answers that I'm going to give are generic, right? They're without knowing your kids. They're without knowing even your kids' ages or your kids' personalities or the details. You need somebody that's there working with your family to be able to guide you as this goes on. That being said, some points that I would make. And I'm hesitant to say exact ages for something like this because it also depends on your kids and what their dynamic looks like and what questions they're asking about this, etc. The points that I would make when they're younger is that your father loves you and your father wants to keep you safe, and he needs extra help doing that. And that extra help is grandma. Grandma is here to help daddy keep you safe, right? Because some things in life we're able to do on our own, and you can relate it to your kids, right? Like some things, like let's say, you're able to, ride the scooter by yourself, right? But when it comes to riding your bike, you still need the help of training wheels, or you still need, mommy to ride behind you and hold on to it, etc. Right? And it's the same thing with even grown-ups. Some things grown-ups can do on our own, and other things we need help for. And when it comes to keeping you safe, right? Daddy needs grandma's help for that. And isn't it great? And this is right, the focus that I would go. And it's so great that we have grandma to be here so that you can continue hanging out with daddy and having the wonderful time that you have with daddy and enjoying daddy's company, right? And because you love daddy, when they're very young, that is the focus that I would put on it for that. Once they get a little bit older, and again, I'm so hesitant to give ages, right? But maybe from like around like ages, 8 to 11, somewhere with 7 to 12, somewhere in that range is where I would start giving a little bit more information, right? Where I would say, that daddy actually made some unsafe choices. And that is why, right? Because of some unsafe choices that daddy made, that's why, a judge decided, and it's a judge's job to decide what is safe and what is, helpful, right? Things like that, right? Because I'm sure you're at that age, kids would know what a judge is, right? And a judge thought of this great idea. A judge said, listen, I want this daddy to be able to be with his kids because he loves his kids and his kids love him, right? But the judge's job is also to keep kids safe, And so that's why the judge said that he needs extra supervision. And that's why grandma's there. And now your kids are likely to ask, what were those choices, right? Especially at that age. And that's where it depends on your child, right? And it depends on what you think that they can handle and how you want to phrase that, which is where I'm a little bit more hesitant to go into more specifics, right? But I might say that, especially at around those ages, I hope we're already speaking to your children about porn, right? And you can say, remember we spoke about porn, right? And in my class itself, I gave a lot of information about how to talk to kids about porn. Okay. So now you can say, remember we spoke about porn. Well, some porn isn't safe because sometimes, right, people, don't have it. People are put into porn, right? And people take these pictures of them that they don't want them to take of them, and it's not safe, right? And daddy looked at some of that. And that's not safe. We don't want to ever look at pictures or videos of people that they did not choose to be a part of, right? And daddy chose to look at that. And at this age, you can already start explaining to them that daddy could have chosen better, So it's okay to be disappointed in daddy's choices. It's okay to wish that daddy had made better choices. It's okay to know that daddy could have made better choices. And that's why we had to make this arrangement where grandma is now with daddy to keep all of you safer and to make sure that daddy doesn't continue to look at things like that aren't safe, and especially not when he's with you. And then when they're older, 13 plus, at that point, I would already explain just like a lot more specifically what happened and the safety precautions, et cetera, and then start speaking to your kids also about, how they can make safe choices. Now, the important thing is, right, is that, because you want them to feel their father's love and that their identity is not connected to their father's poor choices. That's where we want to emphasize the fact that daddy could have made better choices and you have the option of making better choices, right? And we want to empower kids that they're not, that we're not limited to our parents' mistakes, right? Because a lot of times in situations like this, when you have a parent that's made some really poor choices or unsafe choices or illegal choices, a lot of times kids do take that on as an identity, right? Like, I can't be better than my parents, or I'm also destined to, make these type of inappropriate choices, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or, if my father couldn't be trusted to be safe like this, how can I be trusted to be safe like this? Or I have certain personality traits like my father, so maybe I'm also going to end up, making, perverted or dangerous or illegal or selfish choices, etc. Right? And so this is where you really also want to be building your kids up to the fact that they are their own people. And they get to make their own choices, and they have the power to choose. And look how many great, beautiful choices they make. And lots of people have options to make unsafe or hurtful choices, and we choose not to. We rise above, right? And that you are not limited by your father's mistakes. Okay, I hope that helped. Next question. I love this question. This is very interesting to me. We have a very small family by our community standards. My oldest is 8, and it bothers her a lot. She's always asking why we can't have another baby, and I usually say something like, this is the family God gave us. Right now, I think she believes pregnancy is something that just happens when God puts a baby in someone's stomach. I'm going to teach her about sex soon, obviously. And my question is, won't she draw the conclusion that we're not having more babies because we're not having sex? I do not want to tell her that I'm on birth control. I don't think that's appropriate to share with her. And I think it would really hurt her to know that. Ooh, good question. So, a couple of responses to this. First of all, this is why, right? This is one of the very important reasons that I encourage, which I spoke about in the course, and I stand by, is to teach that sex is also for pleasure. If you present it to your daughter that, we have sex in order to have babies, then she will draw that conclusion that, therefore, are you not having sex? Or if you're having sex, how come you're not having babies, right? So this is one of the very beautiful reasons to explain that, right, when you teach her about sex, that sex sometimes makes babies and sex sometimes does not make babies, and that sometimes we have sex in order to try and make a baby. And sometimes we have sex in order to, to spend beautiful time with, right? In your case, you would say like, mommy and daddy like spending this special time together, right? And sometimes we have sex because it feels good for our bodies, right? The same way you like, chills or massage. Sex is something that adults do to feel good in their bodies. And, right? And sometimes we have sex just to have fun and have a good time together, right? Because sex can also be fun, right? So we want to expand our definition of why we're having sex, and we also want to teach kids an expanded understanding of sex. And it's also right to teach her that sometimes sex makes a baby and sometimes it doesn't. And this goes back to the concept of, especially for infertility's sake, we also don't want to continue raising people with this very, black and white, rigid belief that sex should always make a baby when we start trying for that, because that leads to so much disappointment, when in reality, it's super normal for it to take a year to conceive. And we could eliminate a lot of the angst and fear that people experience, right? And so that's for that portion of it, right? Don't teach it to her that way, so she won't draw that conclusion. And in terms of, right, the other part of your question of, I don't want to tell her I'm on birth control, and she's like, she wants to have another baby, etc. So I want to just push you a little bit, right, on why you don't want to tell her you're on birth control. And obviously you are entitled to choose what works for your family. And I just want to maybe stretch your edges on this a little bit, right? So it's not that you have to teach her that you're on birth control per se, right? If you're not comfortable with that. But I do think that there's value and validity in the fact that you can teach her that we all make choices that work for us. For some families, right, it works for them to have a lot of babies and they want to have a lot of kids and they can handle raising a lot of kids. And for other families, they want to have a few kids, right? And or for other families, they feel like I can be a great parent, right, to 4 kids. But if I had 6 kids, then I wouldn't have enough energy or time for those 6 kids. So I want to have 4. And other parents feel like I could have the energy for 12 kids. So I want to have 12, right? And ultimately, every parent decides for themselves, what's the right amount for me, for our family? What can our family handle? Sometimes parents say, I want to have another baby, but now it's not the right time for me. So I'm going to try and have that baby in 2 years from now. I actually think it's a very powerful thing to teach your child, right? And it's also a great opportunity to teach her that nobody else gets to make that decision for you, right? Like to tell her, mommy knows that you really want mommy to have another baby, right? But if mommy knows that it's not the right decision for her right now, or if mommy says, I know that my daughter really wants me to have a baby right now, but I think that I want to have another baby in a year from now, or I think that I'm going to ask God to help me get pregnant only in another year from now, right? Mommy has to do what's best for mommy, even if I know that it's going to be so disappointing for you. And that's such a powerful lesson to give her, that we do not make our life choices based on other people's desires or disappointments, right? It's like literally you're uncodependencying her already, right? Because if you cater to the fact that like, well, she wants me to have another baby, so I should have another baby, then you're also teaching her that we do things because other people want us to, or because other people, or, we do things to save other people from their disappointment, right? And we want to give a much more empowered lens that it has to be right for you, not for other people. And if it's not right for you and it will disappoint other people, sometimes we disappoint other people, right? And really, where I would end with her on this is I would actually just then hone in on her disappointment around this, because that's what this is really about for her, right? She is struggling with the disappointment of this. And that's where she needs the support, is for you to just tune into her disappointment and empathize with her disappointment, right? You really want another baby. I know it would be so fun for you. Tell me what you want to do with the baby. Let's talk about it. I know it's so hard for you to not, right? That's really it. It's empathy and the validation for that aspect of things. So it could be that some of what I shared in this answer is like not gonna do it for you, for some of you, but take some elements of this and apply whichever elements feel in alignment with you. Next question. My 8-year-old daughter has been masturbating since she's a toddler. I've always had a shame-free approach and taught her that it's perfectly okay as long as it's in private. Beautiful. Yay, you. Recently, she asked me how she can stop this habit. I told her I'd get back to her since I wasn't sure what to advise. I'd love your input. First of all, congratulations on how you taught her about masturbation. Second of all, congratulations on telling her I'm going to get back to you since I'm not sure. I love that you did that. And third, congrats on reaching out and seeking that answer for her. Now, my response to this would be to first collect more information. I would first want to know, why does she want to stop this habit? Because it's in the why that you're going to find your answer to her, right? Does she want to stop this habit because she got a shame message from something outside of you, from one of her friends or from school or somewhere else, right? Because then you would respond, right? And help her reframe that shame belief that she got from somewhere. Does she want to stop this habit because there's anxiety linked to it? Maybe she feels like, that maybe she feels anxious when she does it, or maybe she's doing it when she feels anxious, right? And what she's really asking for is another tool to handle her anxiety, right? Sometimes if we're masturbating to relieve anxiety, then masturbation gets wired in our system right along with anxiety. And then masturbation starts feeling anxious, right? Because they start merging in that sense. So then we want to support her anxiety, right? Did she hear a message that it was wrong? Is she embarrassed about it, right? I would really want to figure out why she wants to stop, or maybe she's at an age where it's actually just not feeling good. It could be she's in that stage from when it moves from self-soothing to pleasure and an in-between phase, right? In which case I would then offer her like, okay, well, what are the times where you masturbate? What can I offer you instead, right? Is it a fidget toy? Is it some sort of stress ball? Any of those types of things. Is it to help you fall asleep? Let's look at other ways that you can fall asleep, maybe teach her some deep breathing, stuff like that. That's what I would offer you for this question. I hope that helps. Next question. Regarding teaching our kids about not keeping secrets, is there an alternative to telling your parents still means it's a secret? Okay, so this is a point that I made in the class, and I want to be careful not to discuss in this podcast concepts that I spoke about in the class, just to respect people that paid for the class. But I want to just give one point of this, right? That when I told you that you can tell your kids that if you tell your parents, it's still a secret, how you can explain that, to clarify that, is that oftentimes when somebody tells us a secret and they ask us to keep their secret, what they're asking us is to respect their privacy, to honor their privacy, to not violate their privacy, right? So that's how you could explain it to your kids, is that if you tell your parents something, you're still keeping your friend's privacy private. That parents are not considered breaking someone's trust and privacy. Now, obviously this changes as your kids become teenagers, that shifts a little bit, but also as your kids become teenagers, hopefully, right, they also have more discretion on what they need to tell a parent versus what they can tell a parent, right? Especially in this context when we're talking about safety, right? So it's, when it comes to something safe or not safe, telling a parent never breaks somebody else's trust or privacy. It's always safe. If you tell a parent, it's like, I'm in the trust circle, right? So you can phrase it like that, is that telling a parent still keeps the circle of trust whole, right? Or other times, if you need to tell your parent something because you don't know how to handle it or you feel overwhelmed by it, that also doesn't break the trust circle, because getting support from your parent is how you process, how you support yourself with this information, right? And parents are always also going to keep the trust. Next question. A parent asked you how to handle when a child approaches you about being sexually abused, and the first point you mentioned is to tell the child, I believe you. What about those who have children who are compulsive liars, dramatic, stretch the truth for negative attention, and or have narcissistic tendencies, etc.? How would a parent know if to believe them or if it's a tactic for attention, etc.? Right? I realize how sensitive this question is. I hope it's not taken the wrong way. I ask this question because I have a family member who's very, very likely to do something like this, without giving any thought to the repercussions. So first of all, I appreciate this question and I honor it. I'm not taking it, it's a fine question to ask, especially in this context of education and understanding. The first thing that I would say is that if you have a child like this, that child needs help, right? If you're going to wait until that child makes an accusation and then you're going to wonder if it's a false accusation based on their other behaviors, etc., then, and I know that this is not your child necessarily, right? But you've waited too long. This child needs help with these behaviors. A child who's a compulsive liar needs help. A child who's dramatic and stretches needs help. A child who has narcissistic tendencies needs help. Like that in itself is unsafe, So that's the first thing. Like you got to get that kid help to begin with and not wait until they might use something like this to hurt another person's life. That's A. The next thing is to keep in mind that statistically speaking, less than 1% of kids make up child sexual abuse accusations. It is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of kids that would make something up. The majority of cases, by far, kids are saying the truth. So our tendency should be to believe kids. And that being said, you also know your child, right? So if you have a child like this, right, then you would have to apply a different response system, right? But I would think that at that point, you would also hopefully get the child help, right? But beyond that is that you should also have certain tools in place to know when this child is telling the truth or not, right? You should have certain rules or structures or agreements or certain boundaries in place related to telling the truth or ascertaining truth, etc. So for a child like that, right, I might say, I'm taking this very seriously that you're telling me this because this is something really serious and I really want to make sure that you are safe and your safety matters to me. And so we're going to have a session with a therapist or a child specialist who specializes in this to make sure that you're safe and to get you the help you need, whatever that looks like, right? Oftentimes, if a child is making that up, they might retract at that point because it's going to start being like more effort than they wanted to invest in something like this. So I would do that. Also, another thing is that remember, at no point in talking to kids about child sexual abuse are you saying, and if somebody ever does that to you, I'm going to get them in trouble and I'm going to make sure that they get in trouble and I'm going to make sure that they pay. I would never advocate telling kids that, especially because over 80% of abusers are somebody known to the family and about 40% of them are family members. So if you tell a kid, and I'm going to get them in trouble and I'm going to make sure that they pay, but then you're talking about their uncle that they also like and the family likes, that kid is not going to disclose because they don't want to get their uncle in trouble. So especially if you're not teaching kids that this is a way to get somebody in trouble, then they're not necessarily going to then weaponize it. They're not even going to realize that it is a weapon, which is also why almost no kids make up false accusations, because they're not thinking this is a great way to get that person in trouble. You're not telling them that people are going to get in trouble. You're just telling them it's not safe and I'm going to want to help you through that. So yeah, those are just some thoughts that I would have to answer that question. Okay, next question. Curious how long this has been going on for. I have 2 more questions and then I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Next question. I want to teach my son about sex, and I want to teach him obviously the mechanics of it and the safety of it, but I also want to teach him the sacredness of sex. How can I do that? I love this question. I love that somebody asked this because it is something that I feel so passionately about. I literally once gave an entire class on sex for adults where I discussed this concept of sex being sacred and spiritual and holy. And you can relate that to religion if religion guides your life, or it can have nothing to do with religion. But there is still a spirituality and a holiness and a sacredness with sex. So I love that you want to teach this to your kid. And that's definitely something that I encourage teaching your kids, right? So for some of you, you already have your views on sex and its sacredness and its spirituality and its holiness. So I would encourage you to add that to the conversation with your kids, right? Whatever views you have on the sacredness and the holiness and the beauty of sex, teach it to your kids, right? So when you say let's talk about sex, right? Here's how it happens. Here's how to be safe, and also I wanted to talk to you about the beauty of sex, right? There's something so special about sex and sexuality. There's something so holy about it. There's something so beautiful and sacred about the fact that our bodies were designed to experience pleasure. That's such a gift. It's a gift that we get to feel this pleasure. And it's such a beautiful experience. And I love that you get to one day experience this pleasure, right? When we talk about pleasure, we are referencing the sacredness and the holiness and the beauty of sex. When we talk about it being a gift, that is sacred, right? When you talk to your kids about the concept about consent in sex, right? That is also referencing the holiness and the sacredness of sex, right? Is that we all have agency over our own bodies and we get to choose who we want to experience this with and how we want to feel and what we want to do with our bodies. And that is also because our bodies are sacred and our bodies are holy and our pleasure is holy. And so we get to decide how we want to experience that. Another way of teaching it is that when you say, that because your body and your pleasure is such a gift, and it's such a gift to give you pleasure, right? And you can give a parallel to, when it's your birthday and we celebrate you and we buy you birthday gifts. Part of that is that, yes, we're getting you a gift, but it's also a gift for us to bring you joy and to make you feel celebrated, right? And so your pleasure and joy is a gift to the people that you let in for that. And so I want you to always know that when you choose to share your body with somebody and to share your pleasure with somebody and to allow somebody to gift you with pleasure, that is sacred and that is holy and that is spiritual, right? You can also talk about the fact that, right, there's the physical and mechanical element of sex. And then there's also the portion of it where you're connecting, right? Where you are having that intimacy with somebody, where you are having this beautiful private experience where you are sharing, right, that vulnerable side of you with somebody. And that is spiritual and that is holy, right? And you say sometimes that is just about making eye contact with somebody when you're having sex with them, right? And allowing them to see into your soul and to see into your vulnerabilities and to see into your desires. That is spiritual, right? There's also giving another person pleasure. That is sacred. When somebody gives you access to their body and gives you the power to bring them pleasure, that is sacred. And I want you to treat it as such. I want you to honor and appreciate when somebody allows you to experience their body and to give them pleasure. That is a responsibility. And it is also a beautiful gift. And I want you to honor it like that, right? Those are all some of the messages that I would love for you to give your children. And I mean, wouldn't it be beautiful if this is what we were producing to the world, right? How would you feel knowing that you released a child into the world, into being somebody's sexual partner, or into being their own sexual self with these beliefs implanted in them, right? And if you do also align with a religious life, then you also say, right, that there is something godly about it, right? That God values your pleasure. And when you are having sex with another person, God is a part of that experience because God values pleasure and takes pleasure in your pleasure and in that intimacy and in that spirituality and in that holiness of it all. Love this question. Okay, final question. I'm raising teenage boys, and I want to be able to teach them that they also have a responsibility when it comes to women and that they should respect women. And I know that so many of the messages out there in the world, whether it's from movies or TV shows or even just advertisements or even locker room talk, has so much disrespect in it and so much sexism and so much misogyny. How can I shift that? First of all, yay! Love this question. That's another really important element of the conversation. And that's why, by the way, this is not about having won the talk. How in the world would you cover the mechanics of sex and the safety of sex and the consent of sex and the toys of sex and the spirituality of sex and the sexism of sex and the pleasure of, how would you do that in one sit down conversation, right? That's why this is just a natural conversation. So also when it comes to the topic of sexism and misogyny, right, and gender violence and rape culture, it is literally your responsibility as parents to not produce a sexist, misogynistic rape culture child. Boom. Of any gender, right? Whether you are raising daughters, it is your responsibility to raise them to be empowered and to know their worth and to know their boundaries. Whether you're raising sons, it is your responsibility to raise them to treat women as equal, to respect women, to see women as more than objects. Whether you are raising kids, regardless of genders or orientations across the board, right, is to see everybody as equally valuable and equally worthy of respect, and no one gets objectified at all, right? And these need to be part of your conversations, especially once your kids hit their teenage years. Teach them the words sexism, misogyny, objectification, gender violence, rape culture, etc., right? It is literally your job to be having these conversations, and it's things from like as innocent, right? When you're teaching your kids about periods, right? Teach all your kids about periods and get rid of that nonsense that when, somebody's on their period, they're super emotional and they can't be trusted and they're so irrational. And that's rooted in sexism. That's rooted in misogyny, right? That women can't be trusted and that they're overtaken by their period and they're way too emotional. I mean, seriously, it's just ridiculous. I was at a holiday meal recently, and I shared with the table that I am a gun owner, that I have my concealed carry license and I own a gun, and it's in my home. And there was a young man at the table, he's maybe 22, and he was like, "What? You have a gun? Wow, I don't know. I would be scared to be around you with the gun when you're on your, when it's that time of your month, right?" So he couldn't even say the word period, first of all, which like a 22-year-old man should be able to say the word period, right? And I didn't really respond to the whole point that he was making, but I'm sitting there thinking, what do you think happens to me when I'm on my period? Like, that's misogyny, thinking that women can't be trusted with guns. First of all, let's just talk about the fact that 88.1% of violent crimes are perpetuated by men. Okay, so are really, men who never get their periods, right? I really wouldn't worry about women with guns, right? And there's just some more statistics on this concept, right? But that's just like one of the smallest forms of misogyny and sexism, right? And that gets ingrained over and over and over. And that has to do with the messaging that we give children, the way that we talk, right, about the topics related to sexism, misogyny, when we are teaching, when it comes to, let's say, rape culture, right? Stop teaching kids to dress a certain way so that they shouldn't ask for it, and instead teach kids to get consent and respect other people, and that they're responsible for their choices, and that no one is asking ever to be raped, right? So it's a huge topic, and I can do an entire podcast on it in general. But for now, I'm just going to say that it's important to educate your kids about these concepts, and especially when they start becoming teenagers and the media that they start watching starts giving these messages all the time, right? I was watching a crime show, right, about a group of detectives looking for a missing persons, and even in that there's misogyny and sexism, right? There's this male cop, and he keeps hitting on the female detective at work, which is so inappropriate, right? He keeps coming really close to her and crowding her and asking her out, right? And then just being like, oh, I'm sure you'd want to go out with me if you saw what was under this shirt, right? And he starts unbuttoning his shirt and laughing and leaves the room, right? And maybe when I'm telling it to you like this, it sounds insane to you, but if you were to watch the show, you might not even notice it or be fazed by it, because we're so used to thinking that that's normal behavior, that there's nothing wrong with that. But that's so inappropriate. And you need to raise your kids to recognize how inappropriate that is, to never do that, and to call it out if they see it happening, right? Or to say, I'm really uncomfortable with you doing that. I'm going to file a report, like, stop it, right? And then what was so disappointing in the show is that she ends up going out with him and sleeping with him. And that's what's so upsetting, is because it's like, not only are you featuring misogyny in this show and sexism, but then you're also featuring women who accepted, but in the end, she liked him and she had a good date with him and she liked sleeping with him. And it's like, no, start raising your kids to not find that attractive, that the happy ending for that is not sleeping with him, right? The ending for that is that you end up with somebody who doesn't respect women, Anyways, so a good point about this is that, to watch the shows and movies that your kids are watching. And when you see a moment like this in a show, pause the show, use it to start a conversation, point out what was wrong with that. Ask your kid what they thought about that. If they thought that was okay, what they would do in a situation like that, what they think should be done, etc. Use these real life moments to teach your kids the real life values that you want them to have. Okay. So thank you all for listening to this podcast. I hope that you found it helpful. If you liked what I shared in this podcast and you want to hear more about it, well, my course is available for sale. The recording of it, it's a 2.5-hour class where I'm teaching literally sex ed from infancy through teenage years, going through every single topic you could imagine related to all of this. And I really give you step-by-step instructions on how to educate. I give you, this is what you should say for this, or this is how you could bring this up in conversation. This is how you could teach this for a 9-year-old. This is for a 3-year-old. This is for a 16-year-old, etc. So if you resonated with how I shared things on this podcast, then I think you will definitely love the class. And nothing that I shared in this podcast is what I shared in the class. So you're definitely going to get new information, more information, etc. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, DM me on Instagram, email me with your thoughts about this podcast. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, bye. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Ascend. I'm Alaya, and I hope you heard something today that can spark healing, growth, or a deeper passion for your life. I'd love to hear your takeaways from this episode. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe via YouTube or Apple/Spotify. Follow me on Instagram @AlayaBCoaching for more exciting content. Until the next time we ascend together.